I'm on the road in Canada, to be more precise, in the province of Alberta, for a very specific reason. The HBO series The Last of Us was filmed here. In my latest video, I already showed you many of the scenes that were filmed in the city of Calgary. In this video, we travel to rural Alberta, and here we will come across, among other things, a very mysterious village. A village that looked like this in the show and like this in real life, but today this village has completely disappeared from the face of the earth. And actually, I've never experienced anything like that during my filming location tours. So, what happened here? And what's the story behind this mysterious village that doesn't exist anymore? Well, that's exactly what we will find out in this video. But before we do that, let's make a short stopover in the sleepy village of Fort Macleod. Because also here we will find some well-known scenes from the show The Last of Us. So, let's get out of bed and let's go. Good morning, friends. Another sunny day and day number 2 of my The Last of Us shooting location tour. I'm going for a little walk now into the city center of Fort Macleod, if you can actually call it like that. I don't know. Here we will find a lot of scenes that are shown in the first episode of The Last of Us, before the apocalypse begins. For example, the famous clock shop where Sarah goes in. Let's see if we can find it. And this is it, the famous watch shop that we all know from the very first episode of The Last of Us. Sarah walks towards it, and this is what the whole scene actually looks like in real life. I already told you in the first part of my filming location tour how hard this series worked with CGI, so computer effects and stuff like that, to make scenes appear more impressive, especially in the zombie apocalypse, where all the cities have completely fallen apart. But in this scene, we also see that even when the zombie apocalypse hasn't even started yet, they used a lot of CGI to make the city look more impressive. You can see in this scene they manipulated various high-rise buildings into the background that don't actually exist. Fort Macleod is actually just a very tiny village. There are no high-rise buildings, so they obviously wanted to make this scene look like it was filmed in a big city, so they turned on Photoshop and put some high-rise buildings in the background. How exactly this whole CGI thing works, I already told you in the first part of my Last of Us shooting location tour, so if you want to know more about it, check out that video. But roughly speaking, it's like this. This series worked with a mixture of computer effects and real backdrops. All of that stuff that you can see here on the right side of the picture, the food truck and stuff like that, was probably no CGI. It was actually put here for the series. And the shop that we can see in this scene was turned into a watch shop for the show. It's actually not a watch shop in real life. But what's quite interesting, they didn't touch this sign, this painting that we can see here on the right side of the wall, which says R.G. Matthews Real Estate. So apparently this building belongs to a real estate agency or something like that, and you can actually still see the lettering in the show. In this scene we can see Sarah in close-up, and in the background we see all these food trucks and whatever else they put here. Seems like there's some kind of celebration going on, because we can also see garlands strung between the houses. In the series it also looks like it's just a small driveway between two houses, but in fact you can actually drive through it, as you can see here in real life. And yeah, there are also no skyscrapers in the background, as we have already learned. Well, and for the sake of completeness, here's a frontal shot of the watch shop. We can see from the building structure and such that nothing has actually changed. Apparently a new window has been installed here and there. What's also missing from the building are those roofs that can be seen here. And here we can see quite clearly what has now been changed in the shop windows. On the left, the barber shop we see in the show actually exists in real life. So only the right side of the building was changed for the show. As I already mentioned, it's not a watch shop in real life. It's actually a real estate agent or something like that. Just a few hours after Sarah visits the clock store, the horror slowly begins and Joel and his daughter try to escape. And all of that happens also on this road crossing over here. Let's check out the scenes chronologically. Joel, Sarah and Tommy, that's his name, I think, escape in the truck and then drive into Fort McLeod via this road. We see this wall or this flat building that stands here on the right. We can also see that in the show. Behind it we see a red brick building, which can also be seen in the series. We can see that something has changed on the left side of the street. We see several street lights in the show that don't seem to be here in real life. Some bushes and hedges also look a bit different than in reality. But then there is this square building here on the left, which also can be seen in the show and also in real life. We follow the car a few meters towards the intersection. Joel, Sarah and Tommy see a police barricade there. On the right there is this brick building that I already mentioned. Behind it a white building. And here on the left there is a building with a jagged roof, which somehow is a quite typical architecture for North America. And what we can also see in both scenes are those traffic lights over here. Then, because they basically have no other choice, the three of them turn right into this small alley and drive towards this house that you can see in the show and that actually also exists in real life. This is what the scene looks like in comparison. Some houses put together a bit strangely, I think. Then another gray block on the right side. In the series we see people running around and screaming, but in reality it's actually a very peaceful place. The three of them then drive around the corner and whoops, where did we end up here? Well, that's exactly the place we were before, because this is basically the backyard of the watch shop, where you saw all those food trucks just a few minutes ago. And here we can see, yeah, you can actually drive through this street and also the food truck is no longer here. So obviously in the show, the people of the food truck and stuff like that had enough time to clean up and remove everything despite the beginning of the zombie apocalypse. Seems a bit like a small film error we discovered here, right? The three once again drive head-on towards a building and then turn right into the street. Buildings like this one always help me to find those scenes because it says Fort Butt Supply on the building, and if you look very closely you can also see that in the show. In reality, as you can see here on the left, there is a cannabis shop in this building, which is quite interesting because cannabis is legalized in Canada for several years now, and that's why you find those kind of shops on basically every street corner here. I don't think it's like that in the United States where this series actually takes place, right? Our three protagonists then turn right onto the street. The police are now on their trail and there are also a lot of other drivers trying to escape. That was filmed from over here. Well, and then they turn into this street, which is also the end of their journey. There is an endless state of emergency here, street battles, monsters attacking people and so on and so forth. And in this scene we can also see that they have changed some signs of those buildings that you can see here. This building on the right is actually called Empress, but they've put a different sign on it. I also suspect that all these other signs that you can see in this street don't actually glow like that in reality. I suspect they wanted to make the street look like a big, vibrant city where a lot of parties are going on and people go to clubs and bars. I think that's not actually the case in the real Fort McLeod. Here's another view from the car. The people are fighting the monsters. On the right we see a building that today has a slightly different name. However, the building is still here. On the left side we see another jagged building that we can see in the show and in reality. And this is the last scene I want to show you from this street. We see all the screens screaming people again as they run towards the truck, and our three protagonists no longer know where to go. And then in the show we can see a very impressively animated scene. A plane crashes into this street. In general, I think it was a very good idea of the producers of The Last of Us to tell the beginning of the zombie apocalypse in this very first episode. It's something that I always missed a little in other zombie series like The Walking Dead, for example. I know today there is also a prequel of the show, but also that one didn't really answer many of my questions, actually. So I actually liked the concept of The Last of Us with this very first episode. We can see the beginning of the apocalypse, to see how fast everything escalates and how civilization collapses. And that's Fort McCloud. Interesting, right? Well, for our next shooting location, we have to take the car again, because we have to go back to an area where I actually came from, the Calgary area. In that area, there is a town called High River, and there we will find the Miller's living house that we can see in the first episode where the horror begins. So, let's go there. And here it is, the Miller's house where Joel and Sarah live. At this point in the show, everything is still in perfect order. The front gardens are well kept, the houses are in top conditions, the neighbors are friendly, people greet each other, and that's actually how it looks like in reality. What do we notice here? Well, there was once again a bit of tricking going on in the background. There is another skyline here with some high-rise buildings that they put in the background, which actually does not exist in reality. In the show, this scene takes place in Austin, Texas, and that's also why they put a big United States flag here in the garden. A garden that's actually not in the United States, but in High River in Canada. Here we see Sarah again coming out of her front door quite happily at this point. This is what the Miller's house looks like in reality today. Here we can see some things have changed since they filmed the show, because this whole building has been repainted, maybe even completely renovated. There used to be these classic bricks here on the right side, but today they are painted completely white, and everything on the left side, as well as the door and so on, has also been redone. Probably, that's my guess, this building was empty when they filmed the show, so they could film perfectly in and around the building. Today it's renovated, and the only thing that still reminds of this time is the sign house number 11, which we still see here on this white pillar on the right. This is where the scene gets a bit scary, although you don't really notice why at this point, because here we can see the old lady sitting in the garden with her husband. And if you know the series, you know what later happens to her. But in this scene, everything is still fine, but what we can see here, if we compare those scenes, also something changed at this house where the old lady lived back then. The veranda that we can see in the show no longer exists, nor does the gravel bed with the plants. And what's also no longer here, of course, is once again the United States flag, which was hung in the background to make it unmistakably clear we are in Austin, Texas. And for the sake of completeness, here's another shot from this perspective where Sarah and Joel are standing in front of their house and loading the pickup truck. Once again, we can see the number 11 on the post. However, everything else looks completely different. Here, Sarah comes out of the neighbor's house, and in this scene, it becomes quite clear something strange is going on. I think there are already helicopters circling in the sky or something, But Sarah is definitely a little skeptical. That was filmed from over here. We can see the front door, which Sarah comes out. Sarah looks up at the sky. Something is very strange. A really great filmed scene, by the way. Look at how the sunlight in the background shines through her hair. The last sunset before the horror. Well, and that scene was filmed from this perspective. Last but not least, another look into the street from this perspective. The first neighbors are already turning into zombies and running out of their houses in panic. That was filmed from over here. And the show suggests that Joel, Tommy and Sarah are driving the truck out of this residential area, and at the end there are 3 signs, including a sign pointing to Austin to the left. In reality, that's complete nonsense, because that's what this road looks like in reality. There are no signs, and certainly not to Austin. Okay, the next shooting location on our list is a very interesting place, even though it doesn't look like it. This is the village where Bill and Frank live. You might remember them, the couple from the show. And they live in a village with a church tower and an own house and stuff like that. And if you're wondering now, where the heck is the village? Where the heck is the church tower? Where the heck is the house? Well, here's where the story gets interesting. The village you see in the show wasn't actually a real village in reality, but rather a residential area. It was called Beechwood Estates, and like the neighborhood we just saw, it was quite upscale. The villas around here were worth several $1 million, and life in the area reflected that. Until this one day in summer of 2013. For days, heavy rainfall hit the region, turning nearby rivers into raging torrents. And soon, many towns in Alberta were affected by a devastating flood. One town particularly affected was High River. At that time, nearly the entire city was underwater. People had to leave their homes and business owners were forced to abandon their shops. There was even talk of giving up the city entirely. The volume of water was just too overwhelming. 4 people died in High River during this disaster alone. Well, and also the residential area of Beechwood Estates was affected. People had to leave their homes, and even after the flood, they never came back. Why? Well, there were some mistakes made here in High River when they built Beechwood Estates. A river needs space to expand when it rains heavily, and with climate change, this will be even more necessary in the future. But the Beechwood Estates neighborhood was built in a floodplain fed by the nearby rivers and streams. It was an area where construction should never have taken place. And when this one-in-a-century flood hit the city in 2013, Beechwood Estates was completely flooded and evacuated. Later, during the city's rebuilding process, authorities decided that no one should ever live in this area again. The land was to be returned to nature to prevent future tragedies. The luxury villas, many of which were still in relatively good condition even after the flood, were bought out by the province of Alberta. But it took many years before this area was fully renatured. For nearly a decade, Beechwood Estates was some kind of a ghost town with no residents. The images we can still see today on Google Street View date from this period. And the producers of The Last of Us took advantage of this. They built, or rather they animated, Bill and Frank's village here. The couple's house was actually just a physical set, no real building that was actually standing here. The church and much of what you see in the series were CGI. The street you can see in the show, however, was real. It was the street of the former flooded neighborhood Beechwood Estates. Today, a few years after filming, not even this street exists anymore. Beechwood Estates has been completely demolished. Nature has completely reclaimed this area, and one day there may be nothing left to remember this neighborhood, except perhaps this video. There are two more shooting locations I'd like to show you, and for that we have to drive towards the Rocky Mountains. There we will find a town called Canmore, and there we will find, for example, the bridge that leads over the River of Death. So let's go there, but tomorrow. First I'm going back to the motel and we will see each other back in a few seconds. And here it is, the famous bridge that we all know from the show The Last of Us. This is what it looks like today, in summer and in reality. And viewers of my Stand By Me filming location tour, of my Stranger Things filming location tour, or of my The Walking Dead filming location tour and many other filming location tours might already know what kind of bridge this actually used to be in the past. Right? Once again, we can see an abandoned railway line here. This bridge is the Canmore Engine Bridge and was built in 1891, and it was part of the Canadian Pacific Railway line that served a coal mine. The coal mine does not exist anymore, and also the railway line does not exist anymore, but the bridge has been preserved and is now part of a small hiking trail. What we can see in this scene is that they haven't changed that much for the show. We can't see the mountains in the background, but I don't think it's retouched. It's just very foggy. On a clear day, as you can see in my picture, you can see impressive mountains in the background. Here we can see the bridge in this perspective, and here we can see they've done some trickery here because there is a little Christmas tree in front of the bridge, and also the bridge itself is a bit overgrown with stuff. In fact, all of that does not exist here in reality, and also the little tree does not exist here. The rest of the bridge, however, is quite true to the original. Even the sign here on the right is actually here in reality, although you can't read it in the show because of all the snow. Here we can see Joel and Ellie walking across the bridge. This was filmed from over here. And this bridge can also be seen from the air in the show, but since I don't take a drone with me on my trips, usually we can't create this scene in detail. But anyway, we can take a look at the bridge from this perspective again. I think that's enough. And you can see, once again, all the great mountains in the background. Then there is another scene in the show where the river is shot in total. I think that must have been filmed somewhere around here. Well, and then there is another scene filmed here where Joel and Ellie are walking through the bushes, and on the left you can see the bridge a bit in the background. I was also interested in that scene, so I bravely walked along this raging river, and tada, I also found this scene. There is the bridge on the left, lots of bushes and forest on the right. Everything actually exists in reality, only Joel and Ellie are no longer here. Well, and that's the famous bridge and the famous River of Death. And now I'd like to show you one last shooting location for today, which is Wyoming, or Jackson City in Wyoming, which actually isn't in Wyoming. It's actually also in Canmore and just a few minutes away from here. And here we can see them, our two protagonists, riding into the village with the group that picked them up. And that must have been filmed somewhere from over here. I know it absolutely doesn't look like that, but from what I read on the internet, they changed a lot in this village here. This street was used as the filming location. We can also see this large mountain in the background, but everything right next to the street on the left side and on the right side didn't actually exist in reality. They put a lot of sets here. For example, these wooden houses here on the left. In fact, there are houses here on the left, real residential buildings, but they don't look anything like what you can see in the show. So according to the internet, they built a lot of sets here and probably also again worked a lot with CGI. The only thing we can still see here at the location are the road and the big mountain in the background. This is the reverse shot, Ellie and Joel riding into the village from this side. Apparently it was filmed from over here. Also in this scene we can't see that much. Back then for the show they built a big fence in the background to seal off this village from the apocalypse. In this scene, once again, we see a whole row of houses directly behind Joel. None of those houses exist in reality, although there would have been the possibility of working with real houses because they actually look quite cool and not that different from those shown in the show, right? And this scene is the last one I'd like to show you from this place, and it's also another hint that we are actually at the right place. Because we can see Ellie on her horse, and in the background we can see a large pointed mountain that looks like this in reality. The buildings from the show are no longer here, but the mountain in the background seems to be exactly the mountain that we can see in the show.
Das Ziel befindet sich auf der rechten Seite.
So, that was my shooting location tour of The Last of Us. I hope you liked it. I showed you a lot of locations in the past 3 days, but to be honest, there are still a few more. Some of the scenes were also shot in the town of Edmonton, which is also in Alberta, but it's 3 hours away from Calgary, so that's a bit too much for my road trip, but who knows, maybe I will visit Canada in the near future again, and then we can of course also visit the locations in Edmonton, and there will be also a second season of The Last of Us, so who knows what happens in the future. Anyway, if you liked my shooting location tour, I would be glad if you leave a thumbs up. You can also hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you won't miss any upcoming video. And if you'd like to support me and my work, you can also do that, for example, on Patreon. There's a link down in the description. Or you can become a channel member on my YouTube channel. There's a button somewhere here around this video. Then you will get exclusive stuff, for example, the addresses of the places I showed you today. If you also like to travel Canada and do a shooting location tour, and you will also get new videos before everyone else, so you should check that out. So that's it for today. Have a safe journey and see you next time.